17 steps. Marcus counted them every day for 18 months. Up to apartment 3C in the worst building in East Side Chicago, where Mrs. Chen sat in her wheelchair, frail, disabled, alone in a crumbling apartment that smelled like mothballs and loneliness. He'd bring her food on his lunch break, spend his own time, climb those broken stairs because the elevator hadn't worked in 3 years. His boss called it theft of company time, fired him on the spot. No severance, no reference, career destroyed for bringing soup to an old woman. But Marcus didn't know those 17 steps were a test, and Mrs. Chen wasn't who she appeared to be. Everything he'd lost was about to become everything he'd gain. The stairs were the hardest part, 17 steps from the ground floor to apartment 3C. Marcus Johnson counted them every day, or had for 18 months. 17 steps, carrying a bag of food, sometimes groceries, sometimes takeout, always something warm. His knees ached. He was only 28, but 18 months of climbing these stairs, sometimes twice a day when he had multiple deliveries in the building, had left their mark. The building's elevator had been broken for 3 years. The landlord didn't care. This was East Side Chicago, where buildings were held together by paint and prayers, where broken things stayed broken, where people learned to adapt or leave. Mrs. Eleanor Chen sat in her wheelchair by the window of apartment 3C. Same position every day, same worn blanket over her legs, blue plaid fraying at the edges, same old cardigan that had seen better decades, hand-knitted, probably by her own hands 40 years ago. And the apartment smelled like mothballs and loneliness, that particular scent of places where people live alone for too long, where air doesn't circulate enough, where time moves slowly and every day is the same as the last. Peeling wallpaper showed patterns from the 1970s, geometric shapes in orange and brown, furniture from the same era, a couch with plastic still on the cushions, a coffee table with cigarette burns from previous tenants, a hot plate on the counter because the stove didn't work and hadn't worked in 5 years. This was East Side Chicago, where buildings were held together by paint and prayers, where people like Mrs. Chen lived on fixed incomes and died invisible, where the city forgot you existed unless you caused trouble or stopped paying rent. Marcus set the bag on her small table, pulled out containers, and today it was chicken soup from the deli, bread that was fresh this morning, an apple. "You don't have to do this," Mrs. Chen said. Her voice was soft, accented. She'd come from Hong Kong 50 years ago. "You've got your own problems, Marcus. Your own life." "You remind me of my grandmother," Marcus said. Same thing he said every time. "She died when I was 12. Used to make me soup just like this when I was sick." He didn't mention that his grandmother had also lived alone, had also been forgotten by a world that discarded elderly people like used furniture, had also died with no one there to hold her hand. Mrs. Chen smiled. Her eyes were sharp behind thick glasses, too sharp for someone who supposedly could barely care for herself. "Your grandmother raised you right." "She did what she could," Marcus replied, and he was pouring the soup into a bowl, setting out a spoon. "My parents died when I was 8. Car accident. Grandma took me in, raised me on Social Security and love." He didn't know why he told Mrs. Chen these things. He never talked about his childhood. But something about her, the way she listened, really listened, made him want to share. "You're a good boy, Marcus." "I'm 28, Mrs. Chen. Not exactly a boy." "You're a good man then," she corrected. "Better than most. Better than you know." Marcus smiled, checked his watch. He was already 15 minutes behind schedule. His boss, David Sterling, regional manager of Sterling Delivery Solutions, had made it clear that personal stops weren't company policy, that Marcus's charity work was cutting into profits, that if it continued, there would be consequences. But Marcus couldn't stop, wouldn't stop. Because when he looked at Mrs. Chen, he saw his grandmother, saw every elderly person society had decided wasn't worth seeing. Gotta run, Marcus said. Got 12 more deliveries before shift end. Thank you, Marcus, Mrs. Chen said. Her voice was different somehow, heavier, like she was saying more than thank you for food, like she was saying thank you for seeing me. Thank you for proving humans can still be human. See you tomorrow, Mrs. Chen. Marcus left, 17 steps down, back to his delivery van, back to packages and schedules, and a boss who was about to make everything worse. He didn't look back, didn't see Mrs. Chen stand up from her wheelchair. Walk to the window, watch him go with eyes that weren't frail or confused, but sharp, calculating, satisfied. Behind her, hidden in the old furniture, a camera lens caught everything, had been catching everything for 18 months, recording every delivery, every kindness, every moment. Marcus Johnson proved he was exactly who Eleanor Chen hoped he'd be. 18 months earlier, Eleanor Chen had sat in a conference room on the 52nd floor of the Sterling building. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Chicago. Art on the walls worth more than most people's houses. A table that could seat 30. She sat at the head, 72 years old, CEO of Chen Global Holdings, net worth $2.3 billion, built from nothing, from a girl who'd arrived in America with $47 and a dream. From 50 years of 17-hour days and brilliant decisions and ruthless competition, she'd won. By every metric society used to measure success, she'd won. But winning meant nothing when your own son wanted you dead. David Sterling sat across from her, 43 years old, her only child, VP of Operations for Sterling Delivery Solutions, one of Chen Global's subsidiaries. He wore a suit that cost $5,000, a watch that cost $50,000. He had his father's eyes, cold, empty, calculating. "Mother," David said. His voice was pleasant, professional, the voice of a man who'd learned to hide what he really felt. "We need to discuss the succession plan." "I'm 72, David. Not dead." "Of course not, but prudent planning." "You want to know when you inherit?" Eleanor interrupted. "That's what this is about. When do you get the $2.3 billion? David's smile didn't waver. "I'm thinking about the company, about continuity, about making sure your legacy—" "My legacy will be determined by what I do now. Not by what you do after I'm gone." She leaned forward. "Tell me, David, if I died tomorrow, what would you do with the money?" David blinked, surprised by the direct question. "I'd expand operations, modernize, increase shareholder value." "You'd gut the company," Eleanor said. "Sell off the parts, cash out. You've never cared about building anything, only taking what others built." "That's not fair, isn't it?" She pulled out a folder. "I've been watching you, David, the way you treat employees, the way you cut corners, the way you see people as resources to exploit rather than humans to value." "That's business, Mother. That's how you succeed." "No," Eleanor said quietly. "That's how you fail. Real success is building something that lasts, something that helps people, something that matters." David's smile was gone now. "Mother, is there a point to this?" "The point is, I'm not leaving you the company. Not yet. Maybe not ever." David went very still. "What?" "You're not ready. Maybe you'll never be ready. So I'm waiting, watching, deciding if you deserve what I built or if I should give it to someone else." "Someone else?" David's voice was tight, dangerous. "There is no one else. I'm your only child, your only heir." "Blood isn't everything," Eleanor said. "Character matters, humanity matters. Right now you have neither." David stood. His hands were shaking, with rage, with fear, with the sudden realization that the fortune he'd counted on might slip away. "You can't do this. I can do whatever I want. It's my company, my money, my choice." David leaned forward. His voice dropped to a whisper. "Be careful, Mother. That accidents happen to elderly people all the time. Falls, heart attacks. Medication errors. Eleanor looked at him, really looked, and saw what she'd been denying for years. Her son wasn't just cold. He was dangerous. "Get out," she said quietly. David left. But Eleanor knew he'd meant it, knew he was already planning, the way he'd planned before, the way he'd planned 13 years ago when his father, Eleanor's husband, James, had died of a heart attack at 55. James Chen, the love of Eleanor's life, dead 3 days after telling Eleanor he'd discovered something about David, something that changed everything. James had never told her what, just said, "We need to talk, tomorrow, about David, about something I found." He'd died that night, in his sleep. The doctor said heart attack, sudden cardiac arrest. It happens sometimes, and even to healthy men. But Eleanor had always wondered, always suspected. And now, seeing the look in David's eyes, she knew. Her son had killed his father, and he'd kill her too if she didn't stop him. That's when Eleanor made her plan. She'd fake her own vulnerability, pretend to be weak, disabled, poor. She'd hide, disappear from her penthouse and her empire and become invisible. Live somewhere no one would look, somewhere David would never think to check. And she'd wait, she'd watch, she'd gather evidence. She'd prove that David had killed James, that he was planning to kill her, and she'd make sure he paid. But she needed help, needed someone she could trust, someone who'd see her as human, not as fortune, someone who'd prove through their actions that humanity still existed. She'd spent 3 months searching. Then she'd found him, at Marcus Johnson, 26 years old, delivery driver, black, poor, orphaned young, raised by his grandmother. He worked for Sterling Delivery Solutions, David's company. One of thousands of employees David treated as disposable. But Marcus was different. Eleanor had watched him, seen how he treated customers, how he helped elderly people with their packages, how he'd once spent his lunch break helping a disabled man change a tire, how he was kind when there was no reward, no audience, no benefit, just kind because that's who he was. And then Eleanor had discovered something else, something that changed everything. Marcus's last name, Johnson. His age, 28. His birthday, March 15th, 1996. His adoption records, sealed. His biological father, unknown. Eleanor had hired investigators, paid for DNA analysis, traced paperwork that had been hidden for decades, and found the truth. Marcus Johnson wasn't just a kind delivery driver. He was James Chen's son, her husband's child from a relationship before their marriage. A son James had never known about. A son David had never known existed. A son who was, legally, an heir to the Chen fortune. Eleanor had sat with this information for weeks, trying to decide what it meant, what she should do. Marcus didn't know who he was, didn't know his biological father had been a billionaire, didn't know he was heir to a fortune. He'd been adopted at 3 by a loving grandmother who'd raised him with nothing but Social Security checks and determination. He'd grown up thinking he was nobody, just another black kid from the South Side with dead parents and no prospects. But he wasn't nobody. He was James's son, and if Eleanor could prove it, if she could show the world and the courts that Marcus existed, everything changed. David wouldn't be the only heir, wouldn't inherit everything, would have to share with a half-brother he'd never known existed, a half-brother who might actually deserve the fortune. So Eleanor had made her plan. She'd rent the crappiest apartment in the worst neighborhood served by Sterling Delivery Solutions. She'd order packages, groceries, supplies. She'd request Marcus specifically, and she'd watch. She'd see if James's son had James's character, if he'd inherited his father's kindness, his humanity, if he was worthy of the truth. For 18 months, she'd watched. Marcus came every day, brought her packages, and then, without being asked, started bringing food, started checking on her, started treating her like family. And never knowing she was watching, recording, testing, never knowing she was his father's widow, never knowing he was being given the most important test of his life. And he'd passed. Every single day he'd passed, which meant it was almost time. Time to reveal the truth. Time to stop David. Time to give Marcus what his father would have wanted him to have. But first, David had to make his move, had to prove he was willing to kill, had to expose himself so completely that even his army of lawyers couldn't save him. Eleanor had been waiting 18 months for David to act. And today, finally, he had. Marcus was loading his van when David Sterling appeared. The regional office parking lot, 5:47 p.m. Marcus's shift had ended 17 minutes ago. He was already working off the clock. Again. "Johnson," David said. His voice was sharp, cold. So Marcus turned. "Mr. Sterling, sir." David was holding a manila folder. His face was red, angry. "We need to talk. Now. My office." Marcus's stomach dropped. He knew what this was about, knew he'd pushed too far, spent too much time at Mrs. Chen's, made too many personal stops. "Yes, sir." They walked to the office building, through hallways lined with motivational posters about efficiency and productivity, into David's corner office, large, cold, decorated with photos of David shaking hands with important people. Not a single personal photo. No family, no friends. Just David and power. "Sit," David ordered. Marcus sat. David threw the folder on the desk. "Do you know what this is?" "No, sir." "It's your performance review. 18 months of data, routes, times, customer feedback, all of it." Marcus waited, knew what was coming. You're consistently behind schedule, consistently over your allotted time per delivery. Do you know why?" Marcus swallowed. "Sometimes customers need extra help. I don't care what customers need. I care about efficiency, profit, staying on schedule." David leaned forward. "But that's not the biggest problem. The biggest problem is this." He pulled out photos. Marcus's van parked outside Mrs. Chen's building. Marcus carrying food. 17 steps up, 17 steps down, every day for 18 months. You're using company time and a company vehicle to play charity worker to some old woman who isn't even a paying customer. "She lives on my route," Marcus said quietly. "She's elderly, disabled. She needs—" "I don't care what she needs," David's voice rose. "You work for me. Your time is my time. Your vehicle is my vehicle. May everything you do on the clock belongs to Sterling Delivery Solutions, belongs to me." Marcus felt his hands clench, forced them to relax. "She's alone. She has no one. It's just food." "It's theft," David interrupted. "Theft of company time, theft of company resources. It's grounds for immediate termination." Marcus's world tilted. "You're firing me?" "I'm firing you for cause, which means no unemployment, no severance, no reference. You're done. Clean out your locker and leave." Marcus stood slowly. His legs felt weak. This job was everything. Barely paid bills, but it was something. It was how he survived, how he paid rent, how he ate. Losing it meant losing everything. "Mr. Sterling, please, I need this job. I'll stop the personal stops. I'll stay on schedule." You should have thought of that before you decided some old woman was more important than your career." David smiled. It was cruel, satisfied. "People like you always make the same mistake. You think kindness matters. You think being a good person means something. But it doesn't. The world belongs to people who take, not people who give." Marcus felt something crack inside him. Not break, just crack. "You're wrong," he said quietly. "Excuse me?" "You're wrong. Kindness does matter. Being a good person does mean something. And people like you, people who think money is all that matters, you're what's wrong with the world." David's smile vanished. "Get out. Now. Before I have security remove you." Marcus left, walked through the hallways, past the motivational posters, past the other drivers getting ready for their shifts. And none of them met his eyes. They knew. They all knew. and they were relieved it wasn't them. Marcus cleaned out his locker. It didn't take long. He didn't have much. A change of clothes, a photo of his grandmother, a book she'd given him, The Power of One by Bryce Courtenay, about a boy who changed the world by refusing to give up. Marcus stood in the parking lot. It was getting dark. Cold. November in Chicago. He had $300 in his bank account. Rent was due in a week. He didn't have a car. Had taken the bus to work every day for 2 years. Now he didn't even have a job. His phone rang. Unknown number. He almost didn't answer. Hello? Marcus? A woman's voice. Familiar. This is Eleanor Chen. Marcus's chest tightened. Mrs. Chen. The woman who'd just cost him everything. Mrs. Chen, I know what happened. David Sterling fired you. Marcus stopped walking. How did you? I need you to come to my apartment right now. It's important. Mrs. Chen, I can't. I need to figure out what to do. I need to find another job. Marcus. Her voice was different now, stronger, clearer. Trust me. Come to my apartment. Everything is about to change. Marcus took the bus. The number 47. The same bus he'd taken for 18 months. Got off at the same stop. Walked the same 3 blocks to Mrs. Chen's building. Climbed the same 17 steps. The door to apartment 3C was open. Marcus walked in and stopped. Mrs. Chen was standing. Not sitting in her wheelchair, not wrapped in a worn blanket, standing, wearing a suit, an expensive suit, Armani, maybe Chanel. Her hair was done, her posture perfect. She looked nothing like the frail, a disabled woman Marcus had been feeding for 18 months. Mrs. Chen? Marcus's voice was confused, shocked. Sit down, Marcus, Eleanor said. Her voice was completely different. No accent, no weakness, just authority, command, the voice of someone used to being obeyed. You're not... Marcus couldn't finish the sentence. Disabled? No, I'm not. Eleanor gestured to the wheelchair. That was a performance, a very necessary one. Marcus felt his legs give out. He sat heavily on the worn couch. I don't understand. I know you don't, but you will. Eleanor pulled out her phone, made a call. It's time. Send them up. Footsteps on the stairs. Heavy. Multiple people. FBI agents entered the apartment, 6 of them, led by a woman in her 40s. Marcus Johnson? The woman said. Yes? Marcus's voice was barely a whisper. I'm Special Agent Linda Martinez. I need you to stay here and stay calm. We're about to execute an arrest warrant for David Sterling, and you're going to be a key witness. Marcus looked at Eleanor. At this woman he thought he knew. This frail, disabled, poor old woman who was apparently nothing she'd claimed to be. Who are you? He whispered. Eleanor sat down beside him, took his hand. Hers was warm, steady. My name is Eleanor Chen. I'm the CEO of Chen Global Holdings. Net worth, $2.3 billion. I own Sterling Delivery Solutions. I own the company David Sterling runs. I own 70% of the shares. She paused. And I'm your stepmother. Marcus's world stopped. What? Your biological father was James Chen, my late husband. He died 13 years ago, murdered by David Sterling, his son. My son. She squeezed his hand. I've been watching you for 18 months, Marcus. Testing you, trying to understand if you're the man your father was, if you have his kindness, his character, his heart. Marcus couldn't speak, couldn't breathe. His father. He'd never known his father. Had been told his parents died in a car accident when he was 8. Had been raised by a grandmother who'd loved him, but never talked about where he came from. This isn't... It's real, Eleanor said. All of it. I have DNA evidence. I have your adoption records. I have proof that James Chen was your biological father. That he had a relationship before he met me. That you were born. That circumstances separated you. That you were adopted. That you grew up never knowing who you really were. She pulled out a folder. Photos, documents, a birth certificate. Marcus Chen. Born March 15, 1996. Father, James Chen. Mother, Maria Johnson, deceased. Your mother died in childbirth, Eleanor said gently. James never knew she was pregnant, never knew you existed. By the time I discovered the truth, it was too late. You'd been adopted. The record's sealed. I couldn't. Her voice broke. I couldn't take you from the grandmother who loved you, who raised you, who gave you everything she had. She wiped her eyes. But I watched you. For years. Made sure you were okay. Made sure you had what you needed. And when your grandmother died, when you were alone, I arranged the job at Sterling Delivery. Arranged for you to be on the route that served my apartment. Arranged everything so I could see what kind of man you'd become. Marcus was crying now, silent tears streaming down his face. My father. James was extraordinary, Eleanor said. Kind, brilliant, generous. Everything David isn't. Everything I hoped you would be. She smiled. And you are. Every day for 18 months you proved it. You brought food to a woman you thought was poor and disabled. You climbed 17 steps because the elevator was broken. You did it with no reward, no recognition, no benefit, just because it was right. That's all I did, Marcus whispered. That's everything, Eleanor corrected. That's character. That's humanity. That's what makes you worthy of what I'm about to give you. She pulled out more documents. David killed your father. Poisoned him 13 years ago when James discovered David was embezzling from the company. When James threatened to turn him in, David was 29, not old enough to know exactly what he was doing. I've been gathering evidence for years, but I needed more. I needed David to try again, to prove he's still dangerous, to expose himself so completely that even his lawyers couldn't save him. She looked at Marcus. So I faked being disabled, faked being vulnerable, and I waited. I knew David would eventually try to kill me, would try to inherit before I could change my will, before I could give everything to someone else. Marcus felt sick. You used yourself as bait. I used myself as justice, Eleanor corrected. And today, David made his first move. She pulled out her phone, played a recording. David's voice. The old woman is the problem. Marcus Johnson. He's too close to her. Sees her every day. If something happens to her, he'll be suspicious. We need to remove him first. Fire him. I discredit him. Make sure he's not around when she has her accident. Another voice. When? David. Soon. I'm meeting with the lawyer Friday. Getting the inheritance papers in order. Then we handle mother. Make it look natural. A fall. Maybe carbon monoxide. She's old. Disabled. Alone. No one will question it. The recording stopped. Eleanor's face was hard. That recording is from 3 hours ago. David was meeting with his accomplice, a man named Richard Hastings who's helped him before. They didn't know I had cameras in David's office, didn't know I've been recording everything for months. She stood. Tonight the FBI is arresting David Sterling for conspiracy to commit murder. They're also reopening the investigation into James's death. How with new evidence? Including hidden camera footage I recovered from our home showing David putting antifreeze in his father's evening drink. Marcus couldn't process this, any of this. His father, his stepmother, his half-brother who was a murderer. A fortune he'd never known existed, an entire life that had been hidden from him. Why, he finally managed. Why tell me now? Because you deserve to know who you are, Eleanor said. You deserve to know that your father was a good man, that you come from love, not tragedy, that you're not nobody. You're Marcus Chen, James Chen's son, my stepson, legal heir to half of the Chen fortune. She pulled out papers, official documents, verified by lawyers. When your father died, everything went to me because we thought David was the only heir. But legally, you have equal claim. James's biological son. You're entitled to half of everything. She paused. That's $1.15 billion, Marcus. Marcus stood up, his legs shaking. I can't. That's not. I didn't earn that. Yes, you did, Eleanor interrupted. You earned it by being the man your father would have wanted you to be, by proving that character matters, that kindness matters, that humanity matters. She took his hand. I'm giving you a choice. You can take the money, walk away, live whatever life you want, or you can help me rebuild what David tried to destroy. Help me turn Chen Global into something that helps people, not just profits from them. Help me create a legacy your father would have been proud of. Marcus looked at her, at this woman who'd pretended to be helpless, who'd tested him for 18 months, or who'd watched her own son become a monster and still had the strength to fight back. What do you need me to do? Marcus asked. Eleanor smiled. I need you to be you. Just keep being Marcus Johnson. The man who climbs 17 steps every day to feed someone who needs it. The man who sees people everyone else ignores. The man your father was, that's all. Downstairs, sirens were arriving. The FBI was executing the arrest warrant. David Sterling was about to lose everything. Marcus stood by the window, watched the agents enter the building, thought about his grandmother, about the woman who'd raised him with nothing but love and Social Security checks, about the father he'd never known, about 18 months of climbing 17 steps. I don't want the money, Marcus said quietly. Eleanor turned. What? I don't want the money. Not for me. I want to use it to help people like Mrs. Chen. Like the woman I thought you were. People who are actually alone, actually disabled, actually forgotten. He looked at her. That's what my father would have wanted, right? That's what you said. Create something that helps people. Eleanor's eyes filled with tears. Yes, that's exactly what he would have wanted. The arrest was televised, news crews everywhere. David Sterling, VP of Operations, led out in handcuffs, screaming about lawyers and wrongful arrest and how this was all a mistake. The FBI ignored him. They had recordings, evidence, proof. The reopened investigation into James Chen's death took 6 weeks. They exhumed his body, found traces of ethylene glycol, antifreeze, recovered hidden camera footage from the Chen home showing David, 29 years old, pouring clear liquid into his father's evening brandy, watched James Chen drink it, watched him go to bed, watched David wait, watched David check on his father 2 hours later, watched David walk away, leaving James dying alone. The footage was grainy but unmistakable. The toxicology was conclusive. James Chen had been murdered by his son. The trial lasted 3 months. Eleanor testified about discovering James had another son, about watching Marcus for years, about David's threats, about the fake disability, about 18 months of testing. Marcus testified about the 17 steps, about bringing food, about David's cruelty, about never knowing who he really was, about inheriting kindness from a father he'd never met. The defense argued entrapment, argued that Eleanor had manipulated David, that the evidence was circumstantial, and that David was a victim of his mother's elaborate scheme. The jury didn't buy it. They saw the recordings, heard David planning murder, saw footage of him killing his father 13 years ago, saw a man who'd spent his entire adult life believing he was entitled to everything, willing to kill anyone who stood in his way. Guilty. First-degree murder of James Chen. Conspiracy to commit murder of Eleanor Chen. Attempted fraud. Embezzlement. The judge was 60 years old, a man who'd built his career on corporate law before becoming a judge. Mr. Sterling, he said, his voice cold, you murdered your father for money. You planned to murder your mother for money. You destroyed your half-brother's career because he showed kindness to the woman you intended to kill. You represent everything wrong with wealth, with privilege, with a system that teaches people money is the only thing that matters. He paused. Life without parole. No possibility of early release. May you spend the rest of your days understanding that some things can't be bought, like character, like humanity, Like the love your father had that you'll never deserve." David was led away, still screaming, still insisting this was unfair, still not understanding that he'd destroyed himself. The media coverage was overwhelming. Billionaire CEO fakes disability to catch murderous son. Delivery driver discovers he's secret heir to billion-dollar fortune. The 17 steps that changed everything. Marcus did one interview with local Chicago news, the same reporter who'd covered David's arrest. "How does it feel to discover you're a billionaire?" the reporter asked. Marcus shook his head. I'm not a billionaire. The money isn't mine. It's a responsibility." "What do you mean?" "My father built something. My stepmother protected it. They both believed wealth should help people, not just accumulate. I'm not going to change that." He pulled out documents. "I'm establishing the James Chen Foundation, $1 billion in funding, focused on helping elderly people, making sure no one is forgotten, no one dies alone, no one has to choose between food and medicine." "That's almost all your inheritance," the reporter said. "It is my inheritance," Marcus corrected. "My father's legacy, kindness, humanity, seeing people everyone else ignores. That's what he left me. The money is just a tool." The James Chen Foundation opened 6 months later, headquarters in Chicago's South Side, where Marcus had grown up, where his grandmother had raised him. They started small, visiting elderly people, bringing food, companionship, medical supplies, whatever was needed. But word spread. Within a year, they had 500 volunteers. Within 2 years, 5,000, operating in 30 cities, helping 50,000 elderly people, making sure no one was alone, no one forgotten. Eleanor stayed on as CEO of Chen Global, but she restructured everything, improved worker conditions, raised wages, made Sterling Delivery Solutions a model employer, profits dropped, stock price fell, shareholders complained. Eleanor told them, "If you only care about profit, sell your shares. If you care about building something that matters, stay." Half sold, the other half stayed. And slowly, profits recovered. Because treating employees well meant they worked better, cared more. You built something sustainable, revolutionary concept. Marcus worked at the foundation, not as CEO. He hired experienced non-profit leaders for that. But as a volunteer, every day he'd go out, visit elderly people, bring food, companionship, kindness. Same thing he'd done for 18 months. Same thing he'd do for the rest of his life. 2 years after David's arrest, Marcus stood on the 17 steps leading to apartment 3C. The building had been renovated. New paint, fixed elevator, better heating. The James Chen Foundation had bought it, turned it into affordable housing for elderly residents. Apartment 3C was now Marcus's office. He'd kept the furniture, the old couch, the wheelchair in the corner, a memorial to the woman who wasn't, a reminder of the test he'd passed without knowing he was being tested. Eleanor visited once a week. She was 74 now, still sharp, still CEO, still fighting to make Chen Global something James would have been proud of. "You should take more credit," she told Marcus. They were sitting in the old apartment, same spots they'd sat 100 times before. "For what?" "For being extraordinary, for proving that character matters, for using your inheritance to change the world." Marcus shook his head. "I didn't do anything extraordinary. I just fed someone who needed food. That's basic humanity. The extraordinary thing is that we live in a world where basic humanity is considered exceptional." Eleanor smiled. "Your father used to say the same thing, that kindness shouldn't be remarkable, that seeing people shouldn't be special, and that we've set the bar so low that basic decency looks like heroism." "He sounds like he was a good man," Marcus said quietly. He still struggled with this, the father he'd never known, the life he could have had, the years that were stolen. "He was," Eleanor confirmed. "He would have loved you, would have been so proud of what you've become. I wish I'd known him." "I know." Eleanor took his hand. "But in a way, you do know him. Every time you climb these steps, every time you see someone everyone else ignores, every time you choose kindness when the world rewards cruelty, that's James, that's his legacy living through you." She paused. "David had James's blood, but you have his character, and character is what matters." They sat in silence. Two people connected by a dead man, by murder and inheritance and 18 months of testing, and by 17 steps and basic humanity. "Do you forgive me?" Eleanor asked suddenly. "For what?" "For testing you, for faking disability, for watching you for 18 months without telling you the truth, for letting you think you were nobody when you were somebody." Marcus thought about this, about the grandmother who'd raised him, about growing up poor but loved, about never knowing his father but inheriting his kindness anyway, about 17 steps and chicken soup and a woman in a wheelchair who wasn't. "You didn't let me think I was nobody," Marcus said finally. "You let me prove who I was, without the pressure of knowing, without the weight of expectations. You gave me the freedom to be myself, and then you gave me the resources to do something about it." He smiled. "So no, I don't need to forgive you." I need to thank you," Eleanor cried. These weren't sad tears. They were relief, release, the tears of someone who'd carried guilt for years and finally got to put it down. "Your father would have done the same thing," she said. "If he'd known, if circumstances had been different. He would have wanted you to grow up free, to become yourself, to earn your inheritance through character, not blood." "I know," Marcus said. "I think I've always known." They heard footsteps on the stairs, someone climbing, counting. Marcus knew that rhythm, knew those steps. A young woman appeared in the doorway, maybe 25, black, wearing a delivery uniform. "Mr. Chen?" she said. "I'm Jasmine, from the foundation. You wanted to see me?" Marcus stood. "Yes, thank you for coming. This is Eleanor Chen, my stepmother, the CEO. Jasmine's eyes went wide. "Oh, I didn't know. Should I?" "Sit," Eleanor said, smiling. "Marcus tells me you've been volunteering, visiting elderly residents in your neighborhood, bringing food and supplies on your own time." "It's not a big deal," Jasmine said. My grandfather died alone last year, in his apartment. Nobody found him for 3 days. I don't want that to happen to anyone else." Marcus and Eleanor exchanged looks. "Jasmine," Marcus said gently, "how would you feel about running the foundation's expansion into Atlanta? We're opening a new office, need someone to lead it, someone who understands why this work matters." Jasmine's jaw dropped. I'm just a volunteer. I don't have experience." "You have everything that matters," Eleanor interrupted. "Character, compassion, the willingness to see people everyone else ignores. Everything else can be taught." She pulled out papers. "The position pays $120,000 a year, full benefits, housing allowance, and complete autonomy to run the office as you see fit. Your only job is to make sure no one dies alone. That's it." Jasmine was crying now. "I don't know what to say." "Say yes," Marcus said. "Say you'll help us build something that matters, something that proves kindness isn't weakness, that humanity isn't optional, that seeing people, really seeing them, can change the world." Jasmine nodded. Yes, I'll do it." She left 20 minutes later. Contract signed. Life changed. Another person who'd passed a test they didn't know they were taking. Marcus watched her go. Down the 17 steps, into a future she'd earned through character. "How many more?" Eleanor asked. "How many more people like Jasmine? Like you? How many are out there?" "Thousands," Marcus said. "Millions, maybe. People who just need someone to see them, to give them a chance, to prove that character matters more than credentials." He looked at Eleanor. "That's what we're building. Not a charity, a movement. Proving that the world doesn't have to be what David thought it was. That people like you and me and Jasmine, people who believe in kindness, we can win. Eleanor smiled. Your father believed that too. Even when the world tried to prove him wrong. Even when people like David tried to take everything. James never stopped believing that love was stronger than greed, that humanity was stronger than cruelty. She stood. He was right. You're proof of that. A man who grew up with nothing, who never knew his father, who was tested for 18 months without knowing it. And you passed. Not because you were trying to, but because that's who you are. That's who my grandmother made me, Marcus corrected. And who your father was, Eleanor added. And who you chose to be. Never forget, character is partly inherited, partly taught, but mostly chosen. Every day you choose to be kind. That's what makes you extraordinary. Marcus didn't feel extraordinary. He felt like someone doing what should be normal, what everyone should do, seeing people, helping people, being human. But if the world thought that was extraordinary, then maybe the world needed to change its standards. And maybe, just maybe, he could help with that. 5 years later, Marcus stood in front of the United Nations General Assembly. He was 33 years old, still young, still learning, but invited to speak about the James Chen Foundation, and about the work they'd done, about what was possible when you invested in humanity. The room was packed. Representatives from 193 countries, NGO leaders, activists, people who dedicated their lives to making the world better. My name is Marcus Chen, he began. 5 years ago, I was a delivery driver. I made $35,000 a year. I lived in a studio apartment. I had $300 in my bank account. By every measure society uses, I was nobody. He paused. Then I discovered I was somebody, the son of a billionaire, heir to a fortune, related to people who built empires. But here's what I learned. I was always somebody. Before the money, before the inheritance, before I knew who my father was. I was somebody because I made a choice. Every day I chose to see people, to help people. I had to be human when the world rewards being cruel. My stepmother tested me for 18 months. She pretended to be disabled, poor, helpless. Watched to see if I'd help her. If I'd climb 17 steps every day to bring her food. If I'd see her when the world told me she was invisible. I passed. Not because I was trying to, but because my grandmother raised me to be decent, to help people who need help, to recognize that everyone matters. Everyone. The James Chen Foundation has helped 500,000 elderly people in 5 years. We operate in 100 cities. We have 50,000 volunteers. We've prevented countless deaths, countless moments of loneliness, countless tragedies of people dying alone and forgotten. But we can do more. The UN estimates there are 700 million elderly people worldwide. At least 50 million live alone, many in poverty. Many forgotten by their families, many dying without anyone to hold their hand. I'm proposing the Global Humanity Initiative, an international framework for making sure no one, regardless of age, wealth, nationality, dies alone. For making sure everyone is seen, everyone matters, everyone is human. It will cost $50 billion over 10 years. I'm contributing $500 million from my personal fortune. But I need the world to contribute too. Governments, corporations, NGOs, individuals, everyone who believes that humanity isn't optional. The room erupted. Applause, questions, commitments. Within a week, 20 countries had pledged support. Within a month, $5 billion had been committed. Within 6 months, the Global Humanity Initiative was operational. Marcus didn't take credit. He directed it to Eleanor, to James, to his grandmother, not to Jasmine and the thousands of volunteers, to every person who'd chosen kindness when the world offered easier alternatives. The media called him a hero, a saint, the future of ethical wealth. Marcus called himself lucky. I'm lucky my grandmother raised me right. I'm lucky Eleanor tested me. I'm lucky I had the chance to prove that character matters. That's all. But Eleanor disagreed. They were in apartment 3C, the office that had become a memorial, a reminder. "You're not lucky," she said. "You earned everything, every opportunity, every resource, every chance to help people. You earned it by being the man your father was, the man I hoped you'd become." "Do you think he'd be proud?" Marcus asked. "Of what we've built? Of what we're doing?" Eleanor smiled. "I think he'd say the same thing you say, that it's not extraordinary, and that it's just basic humanity, that the world has set the bar too low." She took his hand. "But yes, he'd be proud. So proud. You're everything he was, everything he wanted to be, everything David refused to become." "What happened to David?" Marcus asked. He rarely thought about his half-brother, the man who'd killed their father, who'd tried to kill Eleanor, who'd spent his life believing money was all that mattered. "He's in prison," Eleanor said. "Life sentence. No parole. He writes me sometimes, asking for appeals, for leniency, for me to use my influence to reduce his sentence." "Do you?" "No," Eleanor said. "I write back, every time. I tell him about the foundation, about the people we've helped, about the world he could have built if he'd chosen differently." "Does he understand?" "No," Eleanor said. He still thinks he's the victim, that he was entitled to the money, that I'm the villain for catching him. He'll die in prison believing he did nothing wrong." She paused. "That's the real tragedy, not the life sentence. The inability to see what he became, the inability to understand that character matters more than wealth." Marcus nodded, thought about choices, about paths taken and not taken, about two brothers, same father, different mothers, different upbringings, different choices, one who killed for money, one who gave money away to help people, same blood, different character. Character was choice. That's what his grandmother had taught him. That's what Eleanor had tested. That's what he'd proven. And that's what he'd spend the rest of his life teaching. "I should go," Marcus said. "The volunteers are meeting in an hour. They're planning the expansion into South America." "Go," Eleanor said. "Change the world, one person at a time. That's how it's done." Marcus stood, looked around the apartment, at the worn furniture, at the wheelchair in the corner, at the photos on the wall. James Chen, young and smiling, holding a baby that would grow up to be Marcus. Eleanor had put them up, a memorial to the father Marcus never knew, the man whose character he'd inherited, the legacy he was building. Marcus walked to the door, 17 steps down, same steps he'd climbed hundreds of times, but different now, not climbing to help someone in need, climbing to help everyone in need. "Marcus?" Eleanor called. He turned. "Thank you," she said, "for passing the test, for being who you are, for proving that James didn't die for nothing. That character matters. That humanity wins." Marcus smiled. "Thank you for testing me, for giving me the chance, for trusting that I'd choose right." He paused. "And thank you for being my family. I know I'm not your son by blood, but—" "You're my son," Eleanor interrupted. Her voice was fierce. "By choice, by character, by everything that matters. Blood is nothing, choice is everything, and I choose you, always." Marcus felt tears on his face. "I choose you too." He left, down the 17 steps, into a world that was slowly, incrementally, becoming more human. Because people like Marcus, people who saw others, who helped others, who chose kindness, were winning. David Sterling had believed the world belonged to people who took. Marcus Chen proved the world belonged to people who gave. And in the end, only one of them was free.